Hello, welcome to Art Mirrors Futures. Art Mirrors Futures is a new video blog that I opened recently to talk about many interesting things. One of those things, of course, are mirrors, as the name suggests, so I will be talking about mirrors. More specifically, I would like to talk about artworks that depict mirrors or use mirrors in any particular way. This is a very first video. I'd like to explain a little bit about background of the project, maybe my reasons, what I would like to achieve with this blog, and also give you kind of background why this blog is different from perhaps many other blogs you've seen. A few years ago, I got interested in artworks that depict mirrors or use mirrors in any particular way. Maybe it was to see a few examples. What you see on your screen, it's just a small selection of those artworks. Some of them are very, very famous, most famous paintings in art history. Some of them perhaps barely known to you, but maybe known to expert. And some of them really, really obscure, and kind of nobody knows what they are. So these are kind of artworks I'm collecting. Although collecting perhaps not the right word, I'm actually using them to produce stories, to write stories about these artworks. Sometimes these are stories about one particular paintings, or maybe stories about an artist, or stories about a certain theme across different times. I thought what you see basically is very, very tiny fraction of what I have available, what I collected. What you see here is really a tiny fraction, basically tip of the iceberg of what I collected so far. Just to give you an idea, I never thought it would be so many. I thought I would maybe collect a couple of hundred of such artworks. By now, I think in my data sets there are more than 12,000 artworks of this kind. If Guinness World Record Book would announce the category Art Mirrors, I would likely be a Guinness World Record holder. I don't expect they will run this category, but who knows? The question is, of course, it's not that I'm collecting these things. Collecting is perhaps a misleading word. I'm, in a way, collecting that in the same way as researchers collect the data. So I'm using these artworks to interpret them, to write stories. Maybe most importantly, I use these artworks as vehicles to, or the methods to understand the ideas behind this, how people thought about mirrors, how people treated mirrors, what kind of practices they had over time. So it's less about artwork per se, it's about history of ideas. It's a history of misinterpretation of these ideas. This I have to explain, that's why the whole video is about. The scope of this collection is pretty wide, pretty broad. I'm collecting earliest mirrors and artworks with mirrors from ancient Egypt to ancient Greece and whatnot, through Middle Ages, through then Renaissance and modern times and postmodern times. I'm equally interested in contemporary artworks or contemporary design that use mirrors. Geographically speaking, it's still predominantly Europe. Majority of the work I have is from Europe. I'm very interested to learn more about mirrors and artworks about mirrors from other cultures, Indian, Chinese, Japanese, African, whatever. Welcome. The problem, of course, they're less available and less present, less shared, unfortunately maybe less preserved. But anyway, that's maybe next step. Or I still have this more than 12,000 artworks to work. Yes, from what I said so far, you could gather that it will be yet another blog about art history, or history of art, or general history. I'm kind of perhaps the last person to run the blog about history, because professionally I'm everything but not history. In your corner, I should be kind of in a right sort of corner of this kind. I don't know how it's depicted, but I'm kind of in the corner which usually people put future. Professionally, I'm helping companies to think about the future under different names called future studies or strategic innovation, something like what the future of something will be and how we can deal with it now. So from this background, the kind of my interest in this art mirrors or historical development of ideas is a bit of a bizarre. So, but for me, it's pretty central. To be honest, I didn't plan to have this originally. When I started this project, it wasn't really about futures, but gradually and step by step, I'm actually learning and figuring out that it's incredibly important for what I do professionally. Therefore, this blog is called Art Mirrors Futures. So my studies of the past, the deep past, are actually directly impacting the way how I'm dealing with the futures, although it's not that easy to explain. So basically the whole project is my attempt to, through different stories or different sort of cases, to show how this exploration, how this exercises in a history of art, history of medium, history of ideas can and should be used for future studies. Speaking about the future, maybe kind of I'll try to explain how I see the typical mistakes people are making. So, for example, what you see now, let's assume that's a now, what you see, the state of today. Don't pay attention to colors, they don't have much meaning here. It's just a kind of explanation or kind of representation of the current state of art, like your ideas, your practices, everything related to now. As soon as I ask you what the future of the thing, this thing could be your company, your industry, or maybe your culture, or even your own personal life. So what usually happens, people automatically think about that kind of picture. The key mistakes people are making when thinking about the future is that they simply project the current status. They think the future will be like now, maybe bigger and better and brighter, but fundamentally like now. This kind of picture creates lots of resistances. Majority of people say, no, that's not how we think about the future, and that's actually partly correct. We work, and this is perhaps privilege of the profession I'm in, is we consistently work with the smartest people, you know, from research to business to governmental. These people are usually very, very knowledgeable, very educated, very well educated. And then for these people, that's almost insult. No, we don't believe that. Of course, we know there will be many other things in the future. This will change, this will change, this will change. So kind of yes, correct. That's not a accurate picture. That's accurate picture. I'm using the few representation, for example, the flying cars. We all know there will be flying cars in the future. So the future will be like now, but the future with the flying cars. You could replace flying cars with whatever example you want. The future will be like now, but with robots. Like now, with artificial intelligence. And this kind of buzzword, this sort of new technologies, new developments, they're kind of very easy to plank on this picture. And that's what our experts are doing very eagerly and very confidently. The future will be like now, but somehow, somehow marvelous technology will be added. Not necessarily technology only. I deliberately put here the signals of the emblem of the sustainability goals. So the future will be like now, but all sustainability goals will be achieved. Even this picture may create some resistances. Sort of, what do you mean exactly by this? Still will be projection of the past or projection of the now to the future. So to explain this, and I'd like to present maybe one specific case. This case is taken from the very old projects, and actually today it's 120 years old project. So it was initially run in 1900 or around 1900. It was a project to depict or to imagine the future in 100 years. So it was in France. So Jean-Marc Cotter created a series of those illustrations. In a contemporary slang, we would call it speculative designs. So different representations of possible facets of the future. They look cartoonish a little bit, but they were not. They were pretty serious exploration of the future. So let's have a look at this picture. What you see is basically the ideas about how the classroom of the future will look like, and more specifically classroom of 2000. You see here a typical classroom, and basically everything is centered around specific device or kind of apparatus that is fed by books. Then it somehow magically electrify them. I should avoid the word digitize. Electrify them, and then beams to the brains of the pupils. we can easily discard it as a sort of non-realistic scenario. It didn't happen in 2000. It didn't happen in 2020. We still don't have this in our classrooms, fortunately. When we work with people who are knowledgeable in these domains, we cannot deny that there are massive achievement in cognitive sciences and neurophysiology, and in fact there are some interesting developments in the computer-to-brain, brain-to-computer, even brain-to-the-brain interfaces. Elon Musk is planning to chip us all with his brain technologies. So maybe they're kind of right. Maybe we are moving to this direction, but not quite yet there. On other level, you could say, yeah, well, if you don't take it literally, like beaming to the brains, but interpret it wider, like using other mediums, for example, audiobooks or virtual reality books, we're kind of there. Audiobooks are not that much a novelty anymore. So you could say, yeah, they're kind of way in the right direction with their predictions. However, if I would ask you to look at this picture with different eyes, you could also have a look and see what they have so weird about this picture. And when I'm presenting this in this video format, it's difficult to get your responses. But when I in more real audiences, usually one or two helping voices come from the audiences. One of the striking difference, for example, is that there are only boys in this classroom. Yeah, there are no girls. And sort of they thought there will be only boys in the classroom of the future. Understandably, because it just happened to be there were only boys in the classrooms in France 120 years ago. There were classes for girls, but they were separate, and girls had less access to education in schools and later in colleges, and they're hardly, if at all, allowed to go to university. I think they were not allowed to go to universities. So that's definitely sort of projection of their social reality into the future. It's easy to laugh about them, how stupid these people were, and why they thought about why they thought their social construction, social order will stay the same. But sort of it's, have we learned about this? Have we learned from these examples? Maybe not. We basically accept, of course, for example, the presence of women in education, but how many other social norms do we take, unquestioned and sort of simply project to the future? What I argue is we're making the same mistakes as we making with the future, in a way projecting our current situation to the future, or in a way colonizing the future with our current assumptions. I think we're doing exactly the same with the past. We think the past is actually equal to the now, but only slightly, less and small and not so developed. The next picture is a good example of this representation. So the past is like now, only smaller, not so developed, maybe more primitive, and so on. But fundamentally, the past is like what we have now. If I use this example of the education, that's perhaps how we can think about the school of the past. It's of course the example from the Flintstones. Education in the Stone Age looked like our education. Well, surely they used, stone desks and maybe stone tablets and so on, stone blackboards, but fundamentally the schools were like now. Yeah, you could laugh about this, but that's exactly how we think. We think in a sort of a projection way. We think that the past was like now, but with less developed tools and technologies. Because this blog will be about mirrors, and I hope to show many more mirrors, of course, I have to start showing some of them in a sort of examples. I'd like to show one piece. It's a picture or photography from installation called Infinity Mirror Room by Yaoi Kusama, Japanese artist. She's very famous, mostly famous by her kind of this polka dot paintings and also sculptures, but she also made lots of artworks with mirrors, and some of them are this famous infinity rooms. You could grasp the idea. Basically, it's a room covered by mirrors and like left and right and ups and downs. So when you're inside this room, you see infinite reflection of yourself. It's interesting work. Maybe at some point I'll make a special video about Yaoi Kusama and her art mirrors. But I would use now this particular one as a metaphor, as illustration how we feel ourselves, or how I think we kind of consider the past and the future. We are sitting in a kind of this mirror hole. We see only projections of ourselves. We project, we consider the future, the past, but in reality what we see is this endless projection of our own current state. And so, yeah, we can be happily sitting in this room, or, as suggested by another artist, Italian Michelangelo Pistoletto, we could as well break this. In his case, he did it literally. Again, Michelangelo Pistoletto has many artworks. Some of them are mirror artworks, but that he's perhaps one of the most famous signature artworks at those famous performances, when he was physically smashing mirrors. In this case, I think it was 24 mirrors. He was smashing with it, loudly and very violently, which is, again, I don't necessarily call for violent activities and violent actions. But the metaphor is there, so we may try to break these mirrors. His title, Oltre lo specchio, literally means behind the mirror. So what's behind those multiple reflections? And so, in a nutshell, that's what this project is about. I'm trying to kind of stop projections, first to the past. I'm trying to catch those projections, those misinterpretations, when we basically project our current reality to the past. I'm using these artworks and stories about them as a way to capture those discrepancies, to capture those misinterpretations, and also reflect how exactly I've done it, how we could still sort of detect those projections. And if I learn how to do it with the past, I hope it will help me to think better about the future, or in a sort of less wrong way. So in a nutshell, this work is not about yet another art history exercise. Art Mirror's future is not about, obtaining correct information about certain artworks. It's a labor to understand and capture those, or to prevent perhaps those projections and misinterpretations, and then learning from that and applying them to the futures. So my task is not to become absolutely right or kind of correct. My task is to be less wrong. I'm using the famous, the name of the famous project called Less Wrong. So one more time, welcome to Art Mirror's Futures. I'm of course interested in the feedback. Please fire here in the comments and emails and so on. So welcome to the project.